Last week, in the journal Nature, researchers announced that they've found a new fossil that might help us understand one of the most unique features of mammals: our ears. Also, the little guy's like really cute. So there's that. Called Jeholbatar-Kjeleni, this animal was found by paleontologists in northeast China. It lived in the Cretaceous period about 120 million years ago, and it likely ate things like bugs and plants. It was pretty small, not much bigger than a mouse. Though technically it was not a rodent, it's what's known as a multituberculate, a different mammal group that was pretty successful until they died out about 34 million years ago. So that's neat. It's always fun to find a new fossil species, but this fossil was also special because its ear bones had been preserved. Besides signature adaptations like producing milk or having fur, mammals, including humans, are also known for having unique, complex middle ear bones. These three little bones, called the malleus, the incus, and the stapes, help transfer sound from the eardrum to the cochlea. Reptiles, in contrast, typically only have one bone in their ears, the stapes. Thanks to our unique setup, mammals have superb hearing, able to detect much higher frequencies than other land animals. But these bones are also a bit of an evolutionary mystery. We know two of them, the malleus and the incus, evolved from bones in our jaws, but eventually they moved up into our ears, and we don't fully understand why. Just because they're helping us hear better now doesn't mean that was the original evolutionary pressure that got them moving. And fossil evidence suggests this actually happened more than once, independently each time. Researchers have proposed a few ideas for why middle ears evolved. Perhaps they really did improve hearing right from the get-go, or maybe the moving bones were a side effect of larger brains reshaping the skull. The evolution of Jeholbatar's ears may actually have had more to do with its diet. Because Jeholbatar is so old, scientists were able to spot one bone seemingly caught in transition from being a part of the jaw to being part of the ear. Analyzing the shape and placement of the bones, the scientists came to the conclusion that the shift wasn't a result of the brain changing the shape of the skull or other ideas. Instead, by moving up towards the ears, the bone was essentially getting out of the way of its chewing. This let Jeholbatar move its jaws in a unique forwards and backwards motion. This improved grinding power and made it easier for the animal to hear over the sound of its own noshing. This doesn't necessarily explain how our middle ears developed. Jeholbatar's group is a cousin to our mammal group, not an ancestor, and we don't chew the same way they did. But it does represent an interesting new hypothesis as to how jawbones can become ears, and it might help explain why multituberculates were so successful for so long. In more modern news, scientists publishing in the journal Science Translational Medicine have found that starting HIV treatment within hours of birth may help HIV-positive newborns. HIV can be passed from an infected parent to their unborn child, and it can be fatal or cause serious, irreversible damage to the baby's immune system. The World Health Organization recommends that doctors start treatments that can control the infection within just a few weeks of birth. This new study suggests starting treatment earlier, within hours rather than weeks, might be even better. The researchers working in Botswana started treating a group of 10 HIV-positive newborns with antiviral drugs just hours after they'd been born. Then they tracked the children over the course of 2 years, taking periodic blood samples and comparing them to another group of 10 babies who received the currently accepted treatment regimen. The blood samples allowed the scientists to examine traces of the virus within the DNA of the children's immune cells. They were able to watch how the infection evolved and changed, as well as how their bodies were responding to the infection. They found that starting the antiretrovirals earlier resulted in better immune system responses and signs of a reduction in something called the viral reservoir. Typically, when a virus infects a cell, it hijacks the cell's machinery and starts producing new copies of itself. However, some cells go into a resting state instead, where they don't produce new copies of the virus. Those resting cells are effectively hidden from medicines targeting the virus. These cells can can lay dormant for years before turning back on. This hidden cache of the virus makes up the viral reservoir. By peeking at the traces of viral DNA in immune cells, the scientists could essentially gauge the size of the reservoir. They found that shortly before the babies turned 2, the ones that got the earlier treatment had very low levels when compared to infants that received the standard regime. The scientists think follow-up studies might find even more beneficial effects later on in life. Now, you might think it seems obvious that more medicine earlier is better, but when people's lives are on the line, scientists have to show that the treatments are effective. This study seems to do that, but there are still some barriers. The study was pretty small. Starting HIV treatment earlier on a large scale could represent a huge logistical challenge and require innovations in diagnosis and infrastructure. Remember, we're talking about catching it within hours, sometimes in places with very limited resources. But these results show that this change could have real dramatic benefits for some of the world's most vulnerable populations. And if nothing else, the scientific insights from this study about precisely how the newborn immune system responds to the virus could help optimize or tailor future treatments. Thanks for watching this episode of SciShow News, which was brought to you with the help of our amazing President of Space, Matthew Brandt. You too could become President of Space by joining our amazing community of supporters over on patreon.com/scishow. And before you go, we want to show you these neat lunar calendars available over on dftba.com. They help you keep track of the phases of the moon for all of 2020 so you can stay astronomically informed. You can grab one now.